title of this message is Keep on Praying for America and the Church. And I'm going to sort of explain what I mean when I say keep on praying for America and the church. The world seems to be fomenting in all kinds of different places. All kinds of fomenting, disruptions, instability. So I asked myself, why the fomenting and why the instability? What's going on? How might it affect us? We all assumed we'd be coasting, pretty much staying the same as we got to the new administration. But it doesn't seem like we're coasting. The world seems like all kinds of things are going on. We thought we'd go through this lame duck session until the new administration, all would be well. But that's not what we see. That's not what we're seeing. The world seems to be hurtling toward bigger wars, more wars, or rumors of wars. There are all kinds of rumors about things that might happen. Of course, Christ said there'd be rumors of war, but bigger wars and more instability. I'm going to go to, I was watching TV, I think it was 2 days ago, and I saw what looked like stormtroopers from the South Korean army attacking the legislature of South Korea. The reason that was such a shock, we assume that countries like Japan, South Korea, modern democratic nations, America kind of led them into democracy, but still modern democratic nations that have fair elections and legislature that makes decisions and the military does what it does. And, that looked like third world banana republic at their worst. And that's how it looked. And they had martial law, they shut down all TV stations, newspapers that didn't say whatever the prime minister wanted them to say. And there were mobs on the street and let's say stormtrooper type soldiers out there threatening mobs with machine guns. I thought, wow, I would not have expected that from South Korea. Maybe from some places, but not South Korea. I was shocked. Now, I think the martial law is over, but the prime minister who called it is still in power, and there still is a battle between, I'm assuming, it's hard to know because America doesn't give good coverage of foreign countries, that prime minister and the guy he barely defeated in the previous election, and they want him to resign, the other guy take over, and they're back and forth. Now, I'm going to give you the worst case scenario. I don't think the worst case will happen. But if I were thinking, what's the worst case scenario? South Korea would go into some version of civil war. And North Korea, which keeps a big army on their border all the time, would say, now is the time to invade. Because North Korea is just kind of like a country with an army, a lot of soldiers, and they don't mind losing thousands of soldiers because life is cheap in North Korea. And there's maybe 40,000 American soldiers stationed there caught in the middle. Whose side would America take in a civil war? And if the North Koreans can't, can you imagine the confusion? Now, I assume that will not happen. I assume that the worst won't happen. But it's still not a good thing for American. I think we have more troops in South Korea than any place else in Asia, I believe. This is not a good thing. Now, it may all work itself out. But then there's the Syrian civil war, which seemed to have moved fast. There's a certain chunk of Syria where an al-Qaeda group, and I know al-Qaeda technically has been destroyed during the Trump years and they're gone, but there's an al-Qaeda Islamic war group that was still housed in a corner of Syria, but they were kind of locked in that corner, and the rest of the country, with the help of Iran and Russia, were under the Assad government, and Syria was now stable. All of a sudden, they broke out, took the second biggest city, Aleppo, and I was watching that one night. Then I come back 12 hours later, and they've cut the road between Damascus and Aleppo, and they've controlled it. They're now sieging the third biggest city. Depends on who you listen to. So I'm going to admit, depends who you listen to in the media. They say that The Russians don't think it's worth it because they see a losing side. The Russians are pulling out. And maybe our government has encouraged the rebels because we want the Russians to pull out. But now Syria is being attacked in 3 ways. One is this al-Qaeda type Islamic radical group is coming from the north, and they think the Syrian army is mutinying and just falling apart, military morale and whatever. And they're on their way. They got that feeling they're going to win. The Russians did some little bit of air support, but not enough, and to stop it, and they seem to be pulling out. The theory is that Israel has weakened Iran and both their reputation and their military, so much so that they are the ones keeping Assad in power. Now the opposition thinks, aha, Iran is weak, let's go for it. I mean, that's how it looks. But also the Kurds, if I can explain the Kurd situation. The Kurds are divided between 3 nations, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. What they wanted was Kurdistan, but they don't have it. And when they drew the borders after World War I, the Kurds ethnic group was divided into 3 groups, and they want a united Kurdistan. So the Kurds are now pushing in Syria to get more territory so they can get what they want. And that's a mess because it involves 3 nations. And then Israel is bombing Damascus airport because that's one of the logistic hubs by which Iran pours weapons into Hezbollah and other places surrounding Israel. So it's complicated. And it changed, like they were just taking Aleppo, and then like 10, 11 hours later, they were on their way to Damascus. Things have changed that fast. When we get home tonight or tomorrow, who knows what it will be? And I'm not saying I know what it will be, but it's like all these, and there are 8,000 American troops who are supporting the Kurds. We're in the middle of all that, which we shouldn't be. I mean, that's another issue, but we don't need to be there. But who knows how that'll play out as well. And then, are the Russians leaving or not? Or what does it mean? Then there's the government of France. And we might laugh at France, a big joke, but you realize France is the 2nd biggest economy in Europe. France is a big country. At one time, they had the biggest population in Europe. I think Germany now has it, but that's how big France is. And France probably has the biggest military in the EU. I mean, France is a big deal. It's important. Well, we mentioned about 6, 8 months ago how when Le Pen's party got all those votes, how it was a legislative nightmare for Macron, but they finally kind of patched something together to keep him in power barely, but it probably wouldn't last. Well, it fell through. The details are maybe not worth arguing about. The far left and far right got together to get rid of his party, but there seems to be no solution that will satisfy all the left, center, and right in France. And Macron may be out, and France may have no stable government. This is the number 2 economy in the EU. No stable government for a while. This is not good. I have no idea what's going to happen in France, but they voted no confidence. The prime minister's out. At least the last I heard last night, nothing has changed. And the 2 sides, or 3 sides, 4, whatever it is, they're looking at each other like, no, I'm not giving in, you're giving in. There is no compromise in the legislature in France. And, well, I don't know what will happen. They may patch it together, but even if they patch something together, it's not going to be very stable. And that's France. And there's an election crisis in Romania. I don't know much about it because we don't get much coverage, but people are taking up arms, and one party said, you stole the election. The other party said, no, we didn't. I have no idea. Romania is on the border of Ukraine. And anyway, who knows how that goes? And we don't have enough information because the American press doesn't give you much coverage. We just know they got a crisis. And you're saying, well, that's all. Then there's Ukraine. And this is what really bothered me. With the current administration only having 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks left in power, they changed the calculus in Ukraine. They give them long-range missiles that can shoot deep into Russia, And I'm thinking, wait a minute. If you wanted to do that, why didn't you do that a year or two ago when you were there to handle the consequences? You're doing it now when somebody else has got to handle the consequences. It's like you're making the war bigger as you leave the stage. What sense does that make? And according to the Russians, I'm based on what Tucker Carlson got from the Russians, at least their perspective, they say the Ukrainians don't have the technology to arm and program those missiles. They're American servicemen in Ukraine arming, and so it's like Americans in Ukraine are shooting the missiles at Russia. And that's the Russian perspective. The question is, see, if I were advising Putin, I would say, don't overreact. That's what they want you to do. Now think about that. Say if they overreact and they shoot some missiles at Americans or American targets, they actually have nuclear subs off the Cuban coast. And America has bases all over the world that they could hit. I'm not saying they will. I'm not even saying they should. But you see the possibilities. That's all I'm saying. It's almost as if the current people in Washington are provoking, like with a pen, to make the war bigger as they go out of power. You're creating more chaos as you leave power. Now, I don't know what will happen in Ukraine. And there are people that say there are weapons that we haven't seen put in action yet. Terrible space launched, or at least they come into space and come down. Really terrible weapons that have not been launched on the world yet. We don't want to see those released, or anybody provoke them being released. If people say they're great weapons we haven't seen, Trump said, we think wars will be fought from tanks like they were in World War II. He said, no, it's a whole new ball game. They may have carrier-killing missiles from outer space. I don't know. That's what they claim. We will see. In other words, I'm saying, it's like Satan is saying he's losing momentum and bringing down America. He's losing momentum because the election didn't go the way Satan wants. Decadence that he had planned in for the next 4, 5, 6, maybe 8 years has possibly been turned back. More traditional Christian values. Like, do you know the number of people in Missouri who are homeschooling their kids doubled last year? That was a shocking, and it's probably happening in other states too. They're getting out of public school. And we don't have, well, except for maybe 2 cities, we don't have terrible schools in Missouri. So I imagine if you're in some other states, it might even be worse. He sees some trends that Satan doesn't like. Wokeism seems to be declining. I think Satan is resisting and pushing back. Now, this sermon is based on this scripture, Revelation 12:12. I'm going to explain how I mean it. I recognize this scripture is meant for the end time when Satan knows that Christ is almost about to come. But I'll show you how I think the principle maybe can be applied now. Revelation 12:12. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you that dwell on them. Woe to the because Christ is coming. But woe to the, he didn't say but I'm saying, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is come down unto you. Maybe he's up high in the atmosphere ruling his spiritual empire or wherever he does it from. The devil has come down unto you having great wrath. I want to emphasize the word great wrath. The devil is mad, having great wrath because he knows that he has but a short time. So I'm saying that's how Satan's going to respond in the future. Well, maybe to a lesser degree, that's how he's responding to the election and a course change that he didn't want. I think they had planned all kinds of things for the election, but God blocked it. We can argue about whether you can prove that God blocked it, but I'm saying I think he did. He made things work out the way they worked out. Obviously, Satan couldn't stop God from doing it, but he's mad. He is angry. Just maybe not as mad as he'll be right before Christ comes back, but he is mad. You could call, he has a smaller amount of wrath, but he has wrath. He wanted to keep the decadence flowing. And like sometimes truth stirs up resentment. Too much truth is getting out there and Satan is mad about it. I mean, if you think of it from his way of reasoning, he's resentful. The forces of evil and moral decay, I want to say that right. Moral decay has been aroused. Expect it. They're aroused and expect them to not be happy about the way things are going. He knows he's losing at the moment, and he's mad. Remember the movie The Empire Strikes Back? I realize that's just fiction, but the principle is when they lost the Death Star, as a sci-fi fan, when my kids were little, they loved those toys. You notice that the great villain Darth Vader escaped the Death Star being blown up. And I knew they were going to make a sequel movie. You know, that's how you do it. Let the arch villain barely escape. And the Empire didn't just say, oh, well, we're losing. They came back strong to get vengeance. And that's the second movie, The Empire Strikes Back. Well, if Satan has a spiritual empire and they've taken a loss, is he going to sit down and say, oh, well, that's too bad, we'll behave? No! He's going to come back with a counteroffensive. The evil empire is striking back. Can't you sense it? All these things going on in the world? I'm going to read Ezekiel 3, 1-3. This is Ezekiel 1-3. Now, obviously, this is a message to Israel as they were, and Judah as they were declining and falling down. But it's in the Bible because God wants us to know it. Principles that are given to Israel in their decline also apply to us. Ezekiel 3. Even if you don't believe that America and Britain are the lost 10 tribes. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, eat what you find. Eat this scroll and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he caused me to eat the scroll. And the scroll has the warning words of God to the nation on it. And he said to me, Son of man, feed your belly and fill your stomach with this scroll that I give you. So I ate it, and it was in my mouth like honey and sweetness. So it was sweet in his mouth. So God's word feels good. The truth feels good. You feel good when the truth is out there. And it's good that we warn the world, and it's good to have truth out there. But there are consequences to too much truth. That is, the forces of evil get angry. The forces of evil react. The forces of evil resent the truth. You're going to say, well, if you give them the truth, shouldn't they just repent and say, well, we were wrong? That's not the reaction you're getting. You're getting people resent the truth. They counteroffensive. A lot of times they attack you as a person. They don't discuss the issues. They attack the source. Like, we'll get you. We don't want to hear all this truth. Just as an example, one of our sermons we found out this week, given at the feast, I don't want to go into details, I'm not sure who did it, whatever. YouTube flagged and gave us a penalty strike. And now, according to what they told us, they don't give a lot of details. If you all say something else that we consider verboten, the next strike, you're going to be 9 months in the penalty box where all your stuff is taken offline. In other words, they resent the truth. And I know, but aren't those guys like Zuckerberg and all saying there's no more censorship? They can say anything they want, but the reality is they still have the same algorithms out there saying you can't say this, you can't say that. You know what I'm saying? This sermon might tick them off. I don't know if it will when it goes up online, but hopefully it won't. But the problem is there is still censorship. They just don't admit it publicly because it's not so popular now that wokeism is going out of popularity. People resent the truth. It was sweet to his taste. The truth is, to explain the ways that are good for us. And it's sweet to hear the truth being said and learn things that are good for man. But notice, this is also in Ezekiel, but I'm going to Revelation 10:9. I want to read another way of looking at that whole thing. Revelation 10, verse 9. Give me the little book. And he said to me, take and eat it, and it will make your stomach bitter, but it will be as sweet as honey in your mouth. In other words, and this came in Ezekiel too. In other words, yeah, you're going to enjoy giving the truth out, but it'll have a bitter side effect because the world and Satan will resent it. And that's my interpretation of the word bitter. Not that God's truth is bitter, but that's how it is. It'll force us into bitter battles because they don't want the truth, and Satan wants to counterattack. Satan wants to counterattack. He does not want truth. He's angry right now at the election results, signs that wokeism is going out of popularity in America, and maybe signs in the West that maybe a little more Judeo-Christian values and the Bible are coming a little more popular. We'll see. Many in the world will react in a bitter way to the truth. They don't like truth. Now, I think God will bless us if we pray for goodness. Remember, the title of this message is Continue to Pray. We might think, well, we got the election, we got it made, we're going to ride smoothly into happiness and good times, and some of that may happen. But I think you're going to find the deep state in Washington is going to put up a better fight than you thought. You have no idea the people in Washington that see their big money and their even if it's legal, their grift. I say even if it's legal, their grift. They don't want an efficient government, not that much. They don't want to downsize the federal government. They don't want to reform government. And if the deep state, like a living monster, is going to fight like you know what to survive. And guess whose side the media is on? Do I really need to tell you? They're going to be Kavanaughing people right and left. Brace yourself for every kind of exaggerated bad story you can think of. They don't mind a little decadence if the grift is to their advantage. So we're all expecting everything to be smooth and wonderful. And if it is, that's wonderful. But I think we need to keep praying about it because I think the devil and various evil forces, both normal humans and spiritual, are roused. They're angry. They're angry, and they mean business. Ephesians 9:4, going back to Ezekiel again, and the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations. And I like to think of it, there were people in Jerusalem as the city was getting ready to fall to the Babylonians who really didn't like all the decadence and paganism and temple prostitution and giving babies to be burned and to the idol Molech and all that other bad things were going on in Jerusalem at the time. And those people were probably praying to God about it. And those people got put a mark on. And when all the plagues and violence happened, they survived it. Now maybe people probably couldn't see the mark. It was a spiritual mark. I like to think of like a spiritual check in their forehead. But God knew where it was, and those people survived because they sighed and cried and no doubt prayed for the nation of Jerusalem. I think we should do the same. I don't think America's going to fall. I'm not implying that. But I think God blesses those people that are concerned about the bad things you see going on in society. And so we should be praying against the decadence and for the people. If we do, God will give us greater protection. You never know what's coming down the pike. We might need some extra protection. Satan is angry. God has allowed some of Satan's plans to fail. He's not happy about it. And the way I look at it, if God is determined to do something, Satan can't block it. Yeah, okay. But This is still my world. At least God has allowed him to have it for X number of years left. And Satan said, well, the things I can do, I'm going to do. And he's going to try to get more degradation in America, to thwart God, and to try to suck us down as individuals. And maybe even in the church. Say it'll get a little church controversy. Maybe we'll argue over some holy day calendar issue or some issue about how you pronounce the name Yeshua. Believe me, our churches have split and fought over that. And I listened to this lady who was a Hebrew expert. Listened to her, I thought, whoa, this is more complicated than we thought. You think you understand how Hebrew was pronounced in the days of Moses? Even how it's pronounced now? I certainly wouldn't divide a church over something like that. But I mean, churches have divided over stuff that petty. Or it maybe be something not quite as petty. Satan loves it. Satan says, I love division, I love quarreling, I love strife, I love you and him battling with each other. And if you can do it guns and missiles, even better. But he doesn't mind words and hateful talk as well. Satan would love for that to happen. And also, most of all, he'll try to pressure and lure us away from God. Now, here's my opinion. We can't see the spiritual word. We can't see the spiritual world. We cannot see the spiritual world. So you're saying you're just speculating that Satan is angry. Yes, that's true. I can't see the spiritual world. But one of our best teachers at Big Sandy, one of his famous sermons was The Tracks of the Devil. He said, you can't see the devil. He said, maybe you can smell him, but you can see his tracks. You know he's been through this particular area, like law schools and schools of seminary. You can look at the stuff, his footprints and the damage he's left behind. And I'm just saying, I'm looking at how the world just suddenly seems to have gone off the rails. And there's some trouble in Spain too. I just saw it on YouTube, and I don't fully understand it. They had some FEMA type thing about a flood, and there was like hundreds, at least it looked like, hundreds of thousands of rioters in this Spanish city rioting against the government. And the prime minister and the king and the queen went up there from Madrid. Apparently the prime minister was so intimidated, he ran back. The king and queen stayed there and they threw mud on him. That's the latest. I have no idea what's going on in Spain. I want to predict how bad it is. But if you've seen, and they said the BBC, this is according to this one reporter, it's a British alternate media. Sometimes you get stuff from alternate media you won't get from the regular. He says the BBC is covering up. They claim it's only 3,000 to 5,000. Then he showed the size of the crowd with a sweeping camera. It was clearly at least 100,000, if not more. From one end, you should have seen the crowd. They were screaming. It was in Spanish, so I didn't fully understand it. But they were screaming and mad. And do I know what's going to happen in Spain? No. But don't you sense it? The tracks of the devil. Sure, you could say, all this is just coincidence. It could all be just coincidence that after the election, bad things are starting to happen. But I don't believe it. I believe the devil is angry. The evil empire is striking back. And I'm saying that you can see the tracks of the devil in Spain and France and Korea and Syria. In a sense, in parts of Israel where they're fighting Hezbollah and all those other things, in Romania, and I believe we're going to see it in Washington, D.C. I guess I could be wrong. Everything may go smooth. And in Ukraine, Ukraine's the most worrisome because they're big armies and it's like a meat grinder, and the Russians are winning. I know our media doesn't tell you that, but they are. And so when you're losing a war, you're more likely to be desperate, and you understand that logic. And war now has weapons that are, well, it's hard to move without chewing up a lot of soldiers. They learned that in the last year or two of the Civil War, World War I and World War II. And the point is that they claim over 1 million soldiers have died in Ukraine. I just heard that number on YouTube. Let's assume the number is accurate. A lot of times, both sides don't want to release casualty numbers because they don't want the enemy to know. So you can't always believe it. But it's probably true or close to true. That's a pretty big deal. And now the losing side is up in the ante with the help of the U.S. I'm thinking, is this smart? It doesn't make any sense except the devil is angry. And so, look at, and I'm just deducing from what I'm seeing, evil is stirred up. He wants division and fighting. All this cannot be a coincidence. I just don't believe it. Ezekiel 9:9. Then he said to me, Ezekiel 9:9, the iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. So they're in a lot of, before Judah fell, they're in a lot of trouble with God. And the land is full of bloodshed and the city full of perversity. Some translations say that could also be lack of justice in the cities. And then I look at cities like New York, Chicago, San Francisco. Don't you feel when you hear about a lack of justice and perversion in those cities? I could rattle off particular cases that are in the news, but don't you feel in the cities there's a lack of justice and more perversity? Just look at the former mayor of Chicago. You know, I don't want to say too much, but you know what I mean if you look at about perversity. My point is, now this was obviously true in Judah, but it's starting to be true in America more and more. Perversity. You know, if I had to ride the subways in New York, I'd be really worried in more ways than one. You might be okay, but if something went wrong and you defended yourself or defended others, anyway, you get the idea of the possibilities. The good guys are in trouble, and the criminals, you know, the guy had a rap sheet this long and he was still out of jail. I'm thinking, what kind of sense does that make? And I could give you other examples, but you get the general idea. 2 Corinthians 11:13. 11:13. For such are false apostles, deceitful. I want to emphasize the word deceitful. Workers transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. Satan may also have another strategy for the church. I mean, obviously besides pressure. You know, we'll pressure Sabbath keepers, we'll pressure people that stand by the Bible, pressure people that don't believe in LGBTQ plus, et cetera, all the way, you know, or don't. Anyway, you get the idea. But he may have another strategy, a deceitful strategy. He says, I want to lure you away from God little by little with worldly influences and deceit. Satan is a master of deceit. If I can't get you head on, I will deceive you little by little by little. So I'm saying dig into the truth. Learn as much of the Bible as you can. Everybody thinks, well, I know all I need to know. Well, I think it's smart to say you want to be as strong biblically as you possibly can, because deceitful times are up ahead. Actually, Christ said of all the things, look for the first big event in the end time is deception. You know, the first horseman was a white horse with a bow, but he was conquering people in their doctrine, in their beliefs, in their mind, in their heart. Deceit is the first one that goes. Never give up. If you're having trouble obeying God and sins are dragging you down, I would just say, well, okay, ask God for more help and keep trying. Keep repenting, keep trying. Don't give up. Ask God for more help. Don't give up and say, I'm going to give up and drift down with the rest of the world like the flotsam and jetsam. I'm going to go downstream and just give up. That's what Satan wants you to do. Don't give up. If you're having trouble with sins or your relatives are pressuring you big time and you know, they're saying things like, well, you know, we're going to cut you loose unless you, whatever they demand you do. I heard a guy even actually left the church. I won't go into detail. Over Christmas. It's not that big a deal. I just, you know, I wouldn't. Now, I'm giving an opinion. Everybody can do whatever they want, so don't get me wrong. If you feel that you have to go to a Christmas dinner, you can do anything you want. Just tell them the truth if they pin you down. Well, I don't believe this is really his birthday, but I'm coming just to be a good family member because, as my grandmother told me when she gave me a gift in mid-December, she said, look, she was a great woman. You'd like her if you met her. She said, you're my grandson. I can give you a gift anytime I want to, and you can accept it. I said, okay, sure, right? You know what I'm saying? I wish when I was younger they gave me more Christmas gifts, but that's another story. I'll tell you about that later. But in other words, if somebody wants to give you a gift, send you a card, or demand you go to a dinner, if you want to go. I mean, if you don't want to go, don't go. But I certainly wouldn't leave God's church over it. Does that make sense? I wouldn't, if it doesn't work the way you want it to work, so be it. But don't leave God's church over it. Verse 14, 2 Corinthians 11, no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. In other words, one of Satan's strategy is he is going to look pious and religious. And he has pious and religious men deceiving people. He'll make bad look good. I'm going to use, they call it semantic tyranny. That is, you label something bad, a word, that nobody can be against it. Like, but the two examples I'm going to mention, there was one about women's rights bill, but the women's rights bill was actually destroying homemakers. That was the real point of it. Who can vote against women's rights? You see how that looks and sounds? Well, the two that I want to mention is they call it gender-affirming care or women's reproductive rights. Now, who could be against those two things, right? But gender-affirming care really means mutilating teenagers' bodies or using drugs to do the same. And they will probably be sterilized and screwed up the rest of their life, have to take strong medication, which is big for big pharma, the rest of their life. That's the reality of it. And as far as the women's reproductive rights, it means murdering newborn or almost born babies. What's so good about murdering babies? But if you call it women's rights, who can be against women's rights? And Satan is good at that kind of thing. And I'm going to tell you this story. It kind of makes a point in a corny kind of way. The airplane is deep over the Pacific, and suddenly the electronics go off. Because the electronics tell them which direction to fly in. All that stuff is locked in. They can't fly on the beam. They can't contact control towers, and they're roaming around the deep Pacific, and they're lost. And then the electronics cut off the engine. They're going down. So the pilot gets on the horn. He says to the passengers, I have good news and bad news. He tells them the bad news. But the good news is, I can see visually there's an island up ahead, and I believe we can land on that beach. Probably hurt the airplane's wheels, but we can land on that beach. But because it's uncharted island, we will probably be here the rest of our lives. Nobody can find us because it's not on the chart, and nobody knows where we are because we couldn't radio our last position for a while. Electronics went out. So Mr. Doofus, his wife is next to me, he said to Mrs. Doofus, did we turn off the oven? She says, yes, of course we did. And then he says, did we pay our life insurance? Say, yes, of course we did. Did we? And other insurance bills. And he says, well, you remember there was this pledge we made, $500 a month, to this great new gigantic TV ministry. There's this gigantic church in Houston, Texas, and we promised them $500 a month pledge, and they promised us that God would make us millionaires. Well, did you send in your first pledge check? She said, no, I forgot. He said, wonderful. Believe me, they'll find us. They want their money, they'll find us. And that particular story is not meant to discriminate against any of the the gospels that are based on profitability. You know the ones I mean. Those kind of, but to give you some idea, they'll find it because they want their money. Well, the devil is riled up, and he will use deception. He'll find us. And by the way, do you remember what happened in the first Syrian civil war? It unleashed millions of men, mostly men, but some women, mostly men though, in gigantic caravans to get out of the war zone, and they went into Western Europe, and they have ruined much of Western Europe. That's what the Syrian civil war did. I believe that started in Obama's days, but so it's back a few decades or so ago. Well, if there's another Syrian civil war, could it unleash millions more into Europe? Some they'll want to come to America too. Not that we don't have enough problems already. All these young men, at least some of whom will be, well, we shall see. I guess I shouldn't accuse them of being jihadists, but some of them probably are, or can be turned into. But so this could be really dangerous for the Western world. But whatever happens in the near future, brace yourself. Evil is not going down quietly. Evil is not going down quietly. Keep praying for America. Keep praying for God's church. Danger still exists to America and the church. Galatians 4:17. They zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. But it is good to be zealous in a good thing always. In verse 19, my little children, of whom I labor in birth until Christ is formed in you. And then basically he's saying misuse zeal can be bad. He has to be careful, because zeal, in other words, these bad teachers coming in behind Paul and messing with his churches, the zeal can be misused. And they like to do that with us. So be careful. That's what Paul is saying. Romans 12:1 and 2. Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. In other words, Paul is saying, and I don't think he's contradicting himself. In this context, he says, don't relax. Don't just say, oh, we got it made. Let's relax. Paul is saying, do not relax. Be zealous for God and godly stuff. Be zealous for God in the right way. Put out our full effort in the living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Do not be conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So don't let the movie stars and all the other worldly people influence you to think like the world. Romans 12:9. Let love be without hypocrisy. There's a lot of hypocrisy out there. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love. With brotherly love. Honoring, with brother, in honor, giving preference to one another. In other words, you're honoring other people more than yourself. That's really, like Christ said, love your enemy. Not lagging in diligence. Fervent in spirit. In other words, we need to keep pushing ourselves. Fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Because the devil says, relax. God, Paul says, be fervent in spirit. Serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation. This is the last line of my last scripture. And all the kids say, yeah, it's going to finally shut up. Anyway, continuing steadfast in prayer. We should continue steadfast in prayer. Because if there is an angry Satan, I don't think he can force us. He can try to pull away from God. But he may try another strategy. Have another piece of candy. Go with the flow. Relax. Live a little. Sin a little. He wants to lure us into decadence and away from God. And I say keep praying for America. Keep praying for the Church of God.